Hey guys, I'm the Teen here. I'm going to give a bit of a review. I about 8 months ago, I bought a car from Auto Checkers in Taipei. So I'm going to tell you about that experience. Okay, there's so much to talk about that I could go on and on and on and on. So I'm gonna really try hard to keep this to the main points. Auto Checkers is a place that has a stellar reputation, and it's run by a foreigner, a British guy. So for years now, I learned about them, and then I heard about their services. I think they're still pretty good to use. My reviews are mostly negative, so I would still consider using them for some of their services. For example, they do this thing where if you want to buy a car and they don't have it, you just tell them what kind of car you want to buy, and they'll spend their time searching for one for you, and then they'll find it, they'll check it out, they'll negotiate the price down, and they'll give it a once over, because they're mechanics, so they'll check the whole car and make sure that you're not getting ripped off, or it hasn't been in any crashes, or doesn't have any severe damage. And then they'll so you pay them like a set fee. It's like $600 US or something like that, and then you just tell them what you want. I want a Honda S 2000, and they're like, okay, here's $500. And then like a couple of weeks later, they'll call you back and they'll be like, yeah, we found one. The guy wanted $5,000. We talked him down to $4,000, so that's $1,000 saving right there. And we checked it out. There was something wrong with this, and we told the guy you need to change that before we bought it. So he did. So that's new now. Blah blah blah. So that's a good service. What is not great is when they have their own second-hand cars, and you buy one from them. They have their own second-hand cars, and you buy it from them. The name of the place is Auto Checkers. So and then they brag. Their main point is that they give these cars like 200, 300, 400 point inspections, whatever the heck it is. And you're buying a car from them, and they're the guys that check out cars to make sure that they're good. So you just assume, and then they have like tons of 5-star reviews. So you just assume it's going to be good. And then the car I bought was a Tita, and this guy, that's one of the main cars that you see him selling again and again and again, because they're a cheap car. I know why. Like this is my own. I'm making an assumption here, but it's because it's a cheap car that kind of goes bad after a few years. But the things that go bad on it are fixable. So he knows, okay, this car, someone's selling a Tita for like next to nothing. So he goes, he buys it, and he knows it's probably going to be this is blown, and this needs replacing. So he replaces those things, and boom, it drives okay, and he jacks up the price and sells it along. So let's just say what happened in order. So I buy the car off of him. I don't even test drive it, which is, again, my bad, because I was certain it would be fine, because I trust him because he's a foreigner. I trust him because he's got lots of 5-star reviews. I trust him because he's not primarily a used car dealership. He's a guy that checks out cars for people and fixes cars for people. He's just a mechanic who happens to like fix up cars every once in a while and then guarantee their safety or their roadworthiness. So I buy the car off him, and I assume it's going to be in good shape. And like right away, I noticed a few small things wrong with it. For one thing, I asked him, does it have any scratches? And he's like, nope, none. And I'm like, okay. And then there's a big scratch on it, a big scratch on the bumper. It's on the rear bumper, and I didn't notice it when I was buying it. And then I tell him about it, and he goes like, oh, that's good to know, because I can get some money off of the guy I rented it out to before you. Okay, so you told me the car had no scratches, but it actually does have a scratch, and you're thanking me because that means you can get cash off someone else for you because they scratched my car? okay. But whatever, I let that slide. And then I'm driving my car, and it knocks like a bitch. And what I mean by knock is, if I turn left, if I turn right, if I accelerate, if I brake, this girl thinks I'm completely mental. She's just staring at me. If I do anything on the car, there's a loud metallic knock. And what I mean by that is, if you were to take a hammer and bang it against the metal frame of the car, like a sledgehammer, and just fucking wallop it against the frame of the car, every time you turned, every time you accelerated, every time you decelerated, that's the sound I was getting. That's the knock I was getting. And it was horrific, and I hated it. I've owned a lot of cars over the years. I've owned some like old shit cars before, and none of them had a knock like this. So I contact the guy, and he's like, "Oh, that's normal. That Titas knock. It's common among Titas. Titas just knock. They're like that." I'm like, "What? I'm like, it is the most. Like, the knock was so bad, and I'm not exaggerating, that when people were in my car and I was like pulling into a parking spot, they'd be like, 'Oh, you hit the other car,' and I'm like, 'No, I didn't. That loud crashing sound you just heard is the sound that is normal to Titas, according to the master mechanic at Auto Checkers.'" So I Google it. Now this part gets a bit funny. I Google it, and if you Google like 2007 Tita knocking, boom, first thing you get, subframe. They all have like faulty subframes. It's the bushings in the subframe. They use like shitty plastics, and the plastics dry out and fall apart like after like a month of driving the car. So it's blah 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 blah. So I send it. It was a YouTube video, and the guy's explaining. Yeah, it's like 19 times out of 20, it's going to be the subframe bushings. So you need to replace the whole subframe, or just the bushings. And I send this video to Auto Checkers, and the owner he replies with, "Dude, I'm like an expert at Titas. I'm like Master Tita Man, so I'm not even gonna watch the video." And he didn't. "Just bring it in, and I'll tell you what's wrong with it." So I bring it in. He swaps out something other than the subframe, and then I leave, and guess what? The knock's still there. So I literally sent him a video telling him what he should fix on the car. He doesn't watch the video, tells me to, because he's too conceited, his ego's too big, tells me to bring the car in. He checks the car out, finds something else that's wrong with it, and it was something wrong with it. There was some other rubber that was like torn up or falling apart or something, and he's like, "That would create a knock," and it would. He just found like an additional knock that this car had that somehow Auto Checkers didn't find when they checked the car before they sold it to me. So not only did it have a faulty subframe, it had some other bushings or dampeners that were falling apart that he didn't notice. And he noticed it, like, he lifted the car up, looked under the car, and was like, "Oh, yeah, these things, these bushings, these rubber things shouldn't be falling apart. That's probably your knock. I'll change those." That guy thinks I'm insane, so he's moving further away from me. Yeah, so yeah. See where I'm going with this? So then the knock was still there, so I bring it back again, and finally he goes into the subframe, and instead of replacing the whole subframe, he replaces the bushings, which cost like $15 to replace, and charges me, $150 in labor, and it is a labor-intensive job. But he didn't have the right tools for it, and it looked like he'd never done it before, which is really odd, because he claims to be a Tita specialist, like a Tita expert, and the number one thing that goes wrong on Titas, when you Google it, is the subframe, and he's never touched the subframe. Like he was like experimenting with, hey, maybe this tool will work to get the bushings out. So while getting the bushings out, he like bent the subframe. And then he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. It shouldn't make a difference." And then so he puts the new bushings in, and it was good. Like all lateral knocks were gone. Lateral meaning forward, backward, left, right. Those were gone. But every time I would hit like the smallest little bump in the road, there was a loud metal knock. And I thought like he had fixed the subframe, so I kind of assumed that the up-down knock was coming from somewhere else. But in actuality, later on I discovered, no, it was still the subframe, because the bushings that he put in were tight around, but they were actually loose up and down because of him bending it out of shape, just on one side. So yeah, on the right bushing was loose up and down. So the subframe was still smashing up and down loosely with every little bump in the road. So yeah, and very quickly it became loose because it was already a little loose. Like very quickly, like maybe like it was the knock went away, the lateral knock went away for like a month or so, and then it came back, and it came back with a vengeance, and it was like, yeah, it was even worse. And then he's like, oh yeah, well, and then I took it to a mechanic near my house. So I've already been to him like twice for this knocking problem, and here's the thing, it takes me 3-4 hours to go to him because he's not in my city, and I have to travel, and then I have to leave it there, and then I have to come back. So we're talking, yeah, at least 4 hours per visit to him of my time. So I go to a mechanic that's like near me, and I get them to look at the I get them to look at the knock, and they're like, oh yeah, it's your subframe. And I'm like, really? I just had that, like, the bushings replaced. So I contact him, and he's like, well, yeah, if it's the bushings, then come out here, I'll replace them again. But here's the thing, if I had agreed to that, I would have spent another 4 or 5 hours. Oh no, and he said they didn't have time, so I would have needed to leave the car with him. So we're talking about like an hour and a half to reach him, or an hour or so to reach him, and then leave the car there for days, and then figure out a way to get back to my house. And I live in the middle of nowhere. I live in a small town that doesn't have a train station. Like, we're talking like buses and taxis and buses. Like, I Googled it, and it said something like 2-3 hours just to get back to my house on public transport. So an hour to reach him, and then 3 hours to get back to my house, public transport, and then, you know, and then I'm like, and here's the thing, it wouldn't have helped, because the problem wasn't the bushings that he put in, the problem was that he bent the subframe. So I said to him, why don't you just, I had an idea, and it was a good one. I said, why don't you just instead of me coming out there and us wasting our time replacing bushings that are probably going to fail like a couple of weeks after you replace them again, why don't you just refund me the money from the last time, from you replacing them, since it didn't work. And he agreed to that. So I took that money that he refunded me, which was half the cost of a whole new subframe, and I just went and got a whole new subframe. And now the car is fine. The car is great. Yeah. But I just wish he had like watched that very first video and figured out it was a subframe, and then maybe spend a couple more minutes on Google and figured out you really shouldn't replace the bushings. You should just replace the subframe. And because I cannot stress enough how much depression, angst, disgust I felt over this car. Because here's the thing, the car was a lot of money to me. Okay, it was like a huge portion of all the money that I had saved. Like was it half? Was it a quarter? Was it 90%? I'm not going to say. But it was a lot of the money that I had saved up being put into this car. And I had been looking forward to buying a car from them. I've been sending people their way. They literally. Oh, you okay, dude? You should turn it off first. Oh, dude. He's okay. And the dude, look at what's with the dude sitting next to him, just watching him. Like, help the guy pick. He's struggling to pick up his scooter, and there's a guy sitting 1 foot away from him, just watching him. What a dick. So yeah, I had sent business his way for years. He literally, like, if he was, like, I was naming names of people that bought cars from him that had never heard of him and that I had sent his way. Yeah, so, yeah, and he didn't give me a discount, didn't give me anything. He gave me the car at the asking price that he put on Facebook. even though it took him 6 months to give it to me because he'd rented it out, or something like 4 months, 4 months. So I'm like, okay, you advertise the car at this price, you know, at this age with this many kilometers, but when you're going to give it to me, it's going to be like 3, 4, it's going to be a quarter of a year older and have more kilometers on it, and you still want the same price. Yep. Oh, okay. But I'd been looking forward to buying a car from him, and it was the only car he had available, and I needed a car quick. It was the only car he had available, and so I took it. But yeah, no, like it caused me depression. Every time I drove the car, I'm listening to this loud metallic knock, and I'm thinking to myself, why was I dumb enough to buy this? Look at my money wasted. I should have this, that. I've been looking forward to this for years, and when I finally get it, it's horrible. And every time I talk to him, he's like, "Oh yeah, they knock. That's normal." It's like, what? And then I waste time going all the way to Taipei to get it repaired, and it doesn't get repaired. You know, I felt nauseous when I would drive the car, and I just got the car fixed like a couple of weeks ago, and I bought the car in August of last year. So that's 9 months. For 9 months, this car caused me depression, nausea. Yeah. If it was America, I would totally sue him. I would sue him for the full price of the car, for all the, like, especially considering the week I bought the car, I sent him a video telling him how to fix it, and he's like, "I'm not gonna watch that. I'm a TIDA expert. Just bring it in. I'll fix it." I brought it to him 2 or 3 times to fix a knocking. He never fixed it. And then I finally just went to an Asian local shop, and they fixed it. And they fixed it well too. Like, they didn't just fix it. They also it was just a really good professional shop. Yeah, so that was my experience with buying a car in Taiwan.